We are up to the point now where the Minnesota Wild. So as I go through an alphabetical order, how they missed the playoffs, well, it depends on how you look at it. Early on in the season, Minnesota looked great, and it looked like the division in general, from top to bottom, was awesome, and we were going to see at least a couple of really good teams in the Central miss the playoffs, and it was going to be a crying shame. By the end of the season, the whole conversation is the East is stronger than the West. Colorado makes it with less points than an unnamed team from the East, but Minnesota fell out. And Minnesota, at times, they flirted with getting back into it. Certainly had their opportunities, and in the end, they just didn't have enough to get it done. I think a big part of it, and it's not on the board, but Eric Stahl fell back to kind of realistic numbers after last year having an amazing renaissance season with Minnesota. And I think that hurt them because they didn't really have any star player to take up that mantle, even though Zach Parise played much better this year than in a couple of previous seasons. Now, when we're looking at contracts, Parise still stands out. So does Suitors. They're both at $7.54 million in cap space until the year 2025. It's a long time. And Victor Rask stands out with a $4 million cap hit till 2022. And the trading of Niederreiter for Rask backfired big time. Niederreiter was not performing tremendously well in Minnesota. Rumor had it he wasn't well liked by the coach in Minnesota, Bruce Boudreau, who's not on the board. Does he deserve some blame here? Probably. I mean, you're going to give him credit when they win. You should give him a little bit of blame when they lose. And the good news, if you're a fan of the team, is other than that, I couldn't really find a contract I thought was bad or prohibitive. The thing is, they've only got 14 guys in their roster that are signed for next year, according to Cap Friendly. They are currently at $62.5 million for next year. The cap will be $83 million. This means that if Paul Fenton is creative, he may very well be able to bring somebody in this summer, and it may make a difference for the Minnesota Wild. The one narrative with Minnesota early in the year was they were the oldest team in the league. Would they be able to succeed? I think that while the Niederreiter trade was a poor one, I think the trades involving Granlund and the trade involving Coyle, I think those both benefited them, which is weird because when Granlund gets traded out and Fiala comes in, you look and you go, well, Fiala's not better than Granlund. Maybe. Granlund didn't really impress for me in the Nashville series we just saw the end of, where Dallas knocked Nashville out in 6. And I do think that maybe Minnesota wins that trade. Take the contract talks out of it. Just don't worry about the whole contract cost and what Granlund's going to demand. Just straight up, Fiala may end up being the better player for a longer time. And Donato has been a pretty solid addition for the Minnesota Wild. So it's not all doom and gloom. They did finish with 83 points, which is 18 points less than they had last year. A lot of teams hit 100 points last year. It felt like everybody had 100 points if they got in the playoffs. It felt like it. It's not what happened. But they're in pretty good shape. Now, UFAs, well, Eric Fair, Brad Hunt, and Anthony Bitetto. I think they'll probably make a play to keep Hunt around. Hunt seems like a decent alternate to have on your power play. Fair and Bitetto probably go. If Eric Fair wants to stay in the NHL, somebody will pick him up. He will get a contract somewhere. Bitetto, probably a tweener guy, might be in the NHL, might end up in the AHL. We'll see what happens with him. Restricted free agent Nico Sturm, who played about 5 minutes for the Wild, I think. He's a restricted free agent this summer. Fiala's restricted free agent this summer. Eriksson Ek's a restricted free agent this summer. Pontus Aberg, restricted free agent with arbitration rights. Aberg didn't really impress that much in Minnesota. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if they don't qualify him, if they don't give him a qualifying offer, and he ends up going as an unrestricted free agent. And Ryan Donato arbitration rights, they'll keep him around. Donato, I think, could end up being top 6 for the Minnesota Wild next year. There are reasons to look to the future and say, hey, things could be good. Kaprizov, of course, they're keeping an eye on. He is staying in the KHL, from what I understand, until next year. Next year, he likely comes over, and then we'll see how things work out. Kakkonen is the goaltender. They seem to have as their best prospect. He's 22 years of age. With the way that young goalies have been brought in this year and succeeded, Does Minnesota look to move on from one of their goalies? Do they look to move a goalie and bring him in on an entry level contract? Did they do something with that goaltending? Because the goaltending this year didn't feel like it was as good as last year, and yet the numbers. Well, look at them. Last year they were 11th in goals for with 253. Goals against, they were 11th with 232. This year, they're 28th in goals for with 211. They're 13th in goals against with 237. They only allowed 5 more goals than they scored last year. So that drop of 18 points, I can't really say that it's on Dubnyk and Stalock. Dubnyk and Stalock's numbers relatively the same for goals against as last year. It's the goals for that took a major hit. So whether they try to get younger and faster up front, which I think adding Donato and Fiala, I think that's part of that. I think Eriksson Ek being in there is going to be part of it as well. We'll see. And how a guy like Koivu could bounce back next year. Or maybe Eric Stahl can find another gear next year. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. Now, where they end up falling out of it, it started around the end of November. And I took some heat for my power rankings around then. So from November 27th to December 7th, they lost 5 out of 6. And so, and I remember it because it was really weird. So they lost, and I started dropping them in the power rankings. And I started, there was one Wild fan who got really upset. And just, I had it out for the Wild. December 15th to 31st, they lose 6 out of 7. And that drop continues. But it was, I swear, for Wild fans watching this, I had nothing to do with the Wild falling out of the playoffs. The hockey powers have their limits. February 1st to 19th, they lost 9 out of 10. And again, I don't think it was the Minnesota Wild watched my power rankings went, he thinks we suck. I don't see the point in going out there and winning tonight because Shannon says we suck. So I think we're done. What do you guys think? I think we should drink before the game. What's the point? So, yeah, they lose 9 out of 10 here, and I'm not trying to make light of it. This definitely made it so that manager Fenton, who came in and was given basically the directive of clean out however you need to, while Bruce Boudreau was guaranteeing a playoff spot, the GM was being told, clear the deck if you have to, and he did. March 23rd to April 6th, when there was still a glimmer of hope on March 22nd, the team put it out. They lost 5 out of 7 down the stretch. So they were still mathematically alive pretty much right up until almost the end. Finished 7 points short of the playoffs. So any of these streaks you could look at and say, yeah, that's probably where they lose that. I don't think the deals at the deadline hurt them. I think the Donato deal made up for the disastrous Niederreiter deal. And overall, I think it kind of evens out. At some point this summer, we'll look back on the trades this year and how they all seemed weird because they all look one-sided. Almost every trade looks one-sided, and in some cases, like Minnesota, they win a trade and lose a trade that same year. And it kind of feels like it evens out somehow. So we'll see how they do next year. I think the odds of a bounce back are good. I don't know that I would project them to be in the playoffs because we haven't gone through the draft. Now, they don't draft early, so they're likely not going to get any help out of the draft this year. We don't know what they're going to do in free agency, if anything. There's cap space there to make improvements if Paul Fenton plays his cards right. Or if Fenton's going to go the other way and move out a veteran contract or two with the idea of getting younger and faster and maybe taking a step back next year with the idea that they'll be taking extra steps forward after that. They're an interesting team, those Minnesota Wild, and we'll see how they do. But let me know what you guys think, as always, in the comment section below. Minnesota is not a dead-in-the-water team like some others. And really, it's all about scoring goals. If they can score more goals next year, they're good. And their offense was pretty solid early in the season, and then it just sort of fell apart for them. And yeah, I really think Stahl falling back to earth hurt him, and I think that the Niederreiter trade ended up hurting him too. And the one thing that I wonder about is, so Bruce Boudreau's going to be back in the fall, right? So Bruce Boudreau, they're not getting rid of him. How much of a leash is he going to have? So if Minnesota gets off to a slow start in October, are we 10, 12 games in the next season looking at potentially a change behind the bench? And the fact that apparently he couldn't stand Niederreiter and Niederreiter goes to Carolina and lights it up. what does that say about him, or is that just a one-off thing where Niederreiter just needed to be away from Bruce Boudreau and vice versa? And what did they do with Victor Rask? So there's a number of things in play, but again, let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and hey, for Montreal fans, yes, this means you guys are next, because alphabetically, all these teams missed the playoffs in an alphabetical order, which means, yeah, the fix, it's not fixed. It's not. It's too much work. And somebody would rat them out. Anyways, there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.